Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ryan Poe, and happy Earth Day to everybody that turned out for this event today. I am the owner and operator of the Hungry Locavore here based out of Ann Arbor. And today I'm going to talk in depth about the many benefits of eating local and what that looks like and how that kind of action and reaction reflects what happens to the planet and the way that we source our food systems. First, let's talk about the agenda. Obviously, the bullet points are up here. We'll talk about me and my local food mission, the way the Hungry Locavore came about, the benefits of eating local, industrial food system versus regenerative agricultural system, how to join our Locavore community, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions if anybody has any input or wants to chime in. And yeah, I guess let's give it a whirl. So again, my name is Ryan Poe. A little bit about me is I grew up on a small farm in Northern California. Every day my dad would say stuff about like growing the soil. If you grow the soil, everything else will follow suit. He would say it 100 times a season. I spent a lot of time on my dad's property, and my grandma lived right across the street and was a professional chef. So she was heavily involved in pastry chef and basically took all the stuff that we grew, processed, pickled, canning, pies, into the kitchen. And at a young age, I just kind of fell in love with that routine of like planting the seed, seeing it go from the garden into the kitchen table, into a canning or pickling or processing. And I just had a really good affinity with the natural world, and I just loved it. I could never get enough of it. As I got older, my career and hobbies have always been based in nature. Somewhere around college era, I'd moved to San Diego State and dropped out of college and joined the ornamental marine biology field. I did that for about 15 years and basically traveled the world doing that, and then came back to the United States, and we operated one of the biggest coral farms in the Americas for about 5 years, both pharmaceutical as well as for hobbyist trade. Some of my personal hobbies, I love to travel. I love everything about flora and fauna, the natural world, marine biology, obviously. Sustainable farming is a huge part of my life, and the way that we collaborate with nature instead of work against it. And a lot of my personal time is spent with my family. We have our own garden. We do a lot of pollinator way station gardens. Since I work as a farmer here in the area for Sealy Farm, I generally don't try to grow vegetables on our private property. I try to do things that I normally don't do in the farming world. So a lot of mushroom growing, a lot of pollinator way stations, specifically for monarchs. Last year, our family released maybe around 250 monarchs. And we did some geotagging with them at the Leslie Science Center, and we're really proactive in that, save that species. Lastly, always been a foodie lover since birth. I was never a picky eater, so anything that was offered to me, I would always give it a try, and I'm still kind of that mentality. And our menus kind of reflect the worldly travels, my grandma's kitchen, and just our passion to just see diversity, which rules them all. I'll say that line a lot in this speak. Diversity is a huge thing about food and food systems that tend to get neglected. And I guess the long story short is that diversity rules it all. So the more diversity we have, the better everything functions together. So our mission statement here is to cultivate Southeast Michigan's local food movement by connecting our community to food grown and sourced by local regenerative farms and kitchens, and hence the Hungry Locavore. So in 2018, we'll take it 2 steps back. 2016, I joined a farm in Dixboro Village. I basically was the owner-operator of the property, and I was hitting a plateau of about $1,000 a week in sales. And the owner incentivized me to find other outlets to make more money and make the property more viable. The turn on the light moment for an aggregated or curated multi-vendor CSA share kind of coincidentally happened in 2018. It was October. I had rows of heirloom organic tomatoes out in the field, and a gentleman on the other side of the fence looking at some cows was like, "Hey, what are you going to do with all those tomatoes?" And I shouted back, "I'm going to sell them to you." I didn't think anything of it. He was like, "Yeah, I want to come over there." I said, "Well, the electric fence is on, so you have to drive off the property and come back in." And I thought I would never see the guy again. 20 minutes later, he comes around the corner, he comes out into the field. He was like, "Wow, these are amazing. And it's kind of frost, and it's the middle of October. What are you going to do with all this stuff?" I said, "Well, let's try to work a deal." So the long story short, I gave him a couple bushels of tomatoes. I didn't think anything of it. He came back, and he was a chef in Plymouth at an Italian restaurant, and he brought back marinara out of the tomatoes that I had made, or grown, I'm sorry. And to me, that kind of sparked, okay, we had a weekly CSA pickup on the property every Friday. People could select off the menu of items what they wanted, so we were already kind of down that path to be able to get exactly what the patron wanted. We added the marinara to it, and immediately sparked the moment. It was like, I grew this food, I sold it to somebody else, they sold it to me, and now we're selling it to the public. That kind of spurred the idea of like, let's try to work with other restaurants, bakers, artisanal makers. The guy that was selling the cows next door started to sell me beef. The chicken farmer on the other side started to sell me chicken and eggs. Now you can see how the project is slowly coming together. We had a really good rise in sales, and then the pandemic in 2020 hit, and the whole dream washed away immediately. The farm owner laid me off. 2 weeks later, I joined another farm in the area, and they had almost the exact same project. It was a group of farmers that did a think tank, and they basically had looked at the idea, and the markets had just shut down because the pandemic started in March, and the Carytown Farmers Market was closed. So now everybody was geared up to sell all this produce that they had nowhere for it to go. So we joined together as a group, and basically I became the face of the project and basically ran curated, aggregated CSA share for 163 weeks, wrote all the menus, worked with all the vendors, and basically just added new farms, new restaurants that were supporting farm-to-table movements. And we did it for 163 consecutive weeks. And the idea was to support a circular economy. And then as the pandemic waned away from us and started to fade away in the rearview mirror, we could see that our numbers were dropping. People were going back to traditional models, big box stores, growing their own gardens, and we could see that we were losing momentum on the project. So what I did is in September of 2023, my family and I decided that we were just going to go back to our original vision, not chase a whole bunch of wild horses and like try to bring it back down to reality. So we kind of did a few changes, a few morphs, more handout locations, more accessibility to the food, and broadened the diversity like tenfold. We went from a small group of farmers and restaurants now to a wide, huge platform. So the general gist of the Hungry Locavore is 6 to 8 produce items. The idea is to put a different farm in every single one of those seats. So now when you buy this box, you get 6 to 8 produce items, but that's from every farm is different. So every farm gets a paycheck. The prepared foods, these are vendors and restaurants that rotate. They buy local food, they create a dish for us, and they rotate as well. To date, out of the 6 years of doing a curated share like this, we're probably close to about 70 or 80 local farms, from Flint to the Ohio border, to Jackson, to Detroit. On the prepared foods, that is probably hovering around 120 different businesses so far. We featured all kinds of different things here, like hop tea, glass straws, potted plants. Last week we did seeds for this box for Earth Day. So there is no rules in food, and that is something that we definitely try to guide this project on. The more diversity we have, that rules it all in the field as well as on the table. We featured some of the artisan stuff, drinks, soaps, candles, glass straws, like I just said. The menus are set as themes, and again, for fun and diversity. Like this week we did an Earth Day theme. We've done Italian theme. We did Mexican, Southeast Asian, Indian. And the idea there is this whole area in Southeast Michigan is very diverse culturally, And so if we don't offer that diversity, then obviously the interest kind of fades away. And the target is to basically share everybody's stories. Most of the menus are vegan or vegetarian. That's intentional. We've heard every food allergy you could ever think of. And just as a simple algorithm, just try to keep it clean, plant-based in general for most of the menus. The signups are weekly and they're at will. So right now there is an active menu if you go onto the website. Yum Yum, what was it? Yum Yum Get Some is the name of this one. You know, we throw a lot of humor in these, in the menus, as well as the newsletters, which is a huge educational front on this. So if you buy a box, you basically are getting in my vehicle. We're driving to these farms. You get the whole front story of like what they do, how they grow, how they operate. What do they do in their fields? Are they conventional? Are they spraying? Obviously, we're not featuring those vendors, but this is a way to educate the general consensus of the crowd as far as how these menus look and why we're trying to safeguard this food system. The pickups are very flexible. To date, we have 4 pickup locations, one at Moonwings Cafe in Dixboro Village, one at Unity Vibrations in Ypsi, one at Dozier Coffee on the west side of town, and then one at Vestergaard Farms. And those are all done with intentionality as well. That is a running theme here. Everything that we do is all with intention, and the 4 handout spots are all local food purveyors that support local Michigan-made products, and that's a very symbiotic relationship to our mission statement here. How does the Hungry Locavore compare to traditional CSAs? Obviously, diversity supports a variety of local farms and businesses, and the general target is to create a circular economy based off food. A lot of the food that we're featuring here is usually in a 40-mile radius to Ann Arbor, and we want to keep that money in our economy. This is how we hire more people on the farms and in the restaurants. And we drive that biodiversity by people getting engaged in the product and then going back out and supporting all these businesses. The flexibility to this share, most CSAs, you have to opt in for 4, 6, 8, 12, 16 weeks, whatever their criteria is. These shares are at will every single week. You look at the menu, you don't like it, you don't buy it. Next week, we do Southeast Asian, you love that food, you buy the menu. You know, you want to go to the UP for a month or whatever you want to do, you're a student, you graduated. There's a lot of flexibility here for the consumer to be able to participate. On the transparency side of here, everything on the menu is what you see is what you get. We do allow substitutions if you have some food allergies. We are very flexible to that. You just have to communicate to us and say, hey, we celiacs or whatever the criteria is there. We will definitely work with it. And then on the foodie twist here, the curated collection of produce and ready-to-eat dishes, those are always changing. Again, the diversity rules it all. The more looks and the more advancement we can do on this, you know, it really has trigger points for everybody that's involved, from the consumer to even me curating the boxes. Impact to date, this is a handful of vendors here. These are just their logos here. In the last 6 months, since September, since we started the project as the Hungry Locavore in its 3rd life of doing an aggregated CSA share, we've connected around 300 people to local food. Last week, we just sold our 1,000th box. We've supported the 80 local farms and local businesses there in that same time period, and we've invested over $600K into the local food economy. $60K into the local food economy. And to even take that a step farther back, in the 6 years this project has existed, I've purchased almost $800,000 worth of local food. That encompassed about 120 local restaurants and close to about 70 local farms. And obviously, again, diversity rules it all. And the whole mission statement here is to support the broader community and bring us together and share stories to break down barriers based off of food. This one here, this gets a little complicated. The benefits of eating local. We could do a pro and con here. Is probably the easiest way to explain this. You know, with the health of food here, freshness and nutrient content, food respires through stress. So if you're buying conventional factory farm food, that's coming from X amount of miles away, that food is deteriorating through all those climate zones. It goes, through the desert in Arizona on its way from California. Then it goes over the Continental Divide in Colorado and it gets exposed to cold temperatures. And then it comes into the Midwest and it's a snowstorm. That food fluctuates in stress just like humans do. So you're getting less content of nutrient makeup. And a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, year round, most of the food is being picked from the field Wednesday, Thursday, and it's on your plate Friday, Saturday. So you're definitely getting real food at higher nutritional value. The chemical inputs on the health, I mean, that's a no-brainer. Most factory farm are definitely using fungicides, pesticides, herbicides. I mean, you could name all of it. They're destroying the biome. The chemicals are obviously not good. 99% of the farmers we work with are basically just either certified organic, they're not organic, they call themselves more organic. They don't use synthetic fertilizers. They're not looking for pesticides or herbicides or cheap fixes. And they do things to scale. They're not trying to just restructure the whole landscape to just grow like kale. Peace of mind, we obviously offer you a gateway to the food on a very transparent glass window into the local food system. And obviously we're trying to connect you to the community. With the earth in mind, we briefly talked about the carbon fossil fuel miles. On average right now, everything on your plate travels anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 miles. If you have 10 items on your plate, you can see the fossil fuel mile lineage right there. It's huge. If we all switched to local food, it would be like a light switch. We could reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by almost 20% if everybody in the country took to a Hungry Locavore style project. Waste, commercial factory farm food produces a ton of waste and a ton of food loss. There's no way around it. With our shares, we basically have already reduced as much plastic as we can, and we still are going to a carbon neutral project, hopefully by the end of the year, which will mean all of our one-time use plastic containers will now go into cardstock or some kind of recyclable or biodegradable plant-based material. With the industrial machine, I mean, there's tons of waste. 38% of that food finds its way into a landfill, and obviously somebody had to work and pay for that, and it's destructive to the environment. We like to focus on regenerative agriculture, and we definitely will highlight that more as we get down the path. And then obviously the local economy. I kind of mentioned that before. When we buy this food and $800,000 worth of purchases, that is employing more people. That's buying more stuff. That's buying more seeds from a local seed bank. I mean, we could go a whole 45-minute section on that. And the idea is to stimulate our biome of people that are in these fair trade prices. The fair income for farmers, there are models out there that are consignment models that are very popular in this area where the farmer sells something minus 25 or 30%. We pay a fair trade price. If somebody is growing lettuce in January, like this January, we had 2 days of sunlight in January. And then, a seed that generally goes from seed to table in 35 days, like lettuce, now takes like 120 days. But that doesn't mean that farmer didn't have to do anything. It means he has to pull row crop over it, take it off when it's sunny, put it back on. He has to water, he has to weed. All these things add up to money that they're spending. Instead of saying, hey, we'll take the lettuce for $3, I'm a farmer. I say, you probably got $5 in there. We'll pay you $5 for it. No problem. So we obviously offer that. We're also trying to get people to preserve their land, add rows of flowers, biodiversity, again, rules it all. And we're trying to secure our food supply. The pandemic definitely showed cracks in that industrial factory farm system. And in reality, we can grow everything we need to sustain ourselves within, Southeast Michigan or the greater state of Michigan as a whole. It doesn't mean you're going to get bananas year-round or strawberries or tropical fruits, but there is ways to navigate that, and we are definitely finding that. So common myths about eating local. Local food is limited. Eating local is expensive. Local food is only available in the summer. Local food is hard to find. We definitely hear this all the time. With the limited variety, one thing about the Hungry Locavore is we don't give you successions of repetitive produce. That's something that traditional CSAs do because they planted the crop, they have it in abundance, they have to get rid of it. Whereas us, we can kind of just walk out to the farms and go like, hey, here's 25 people. They all have different crop rotations. Okay, let's just set up 5 or 6 menus And we'll make sure that we don't double you up on the same stuff over and over and over. Eating local is expensive. We hear that all the time about the Carytown market, even about some of our boxes. I can tell you right now, we hit the hammer on the head. We went out to Coney Island and had a very basic cheat meal like everybody does. We all have a desire for sugar or salt. And we spent $55 on two grilled cheeses, 2 French fries, 2 lemonades for my daughters. And then I had a chicken gyro, French fries, and water. And my wife had a turkey ribbon, French fries, and a cherry Pepsi. It was $55 for that. And we sell our boxes for $70. And I looked at that food, I took a picture of it, and then I looked at the picture of the box we just packed a few hours earlier. And I was like, this is crazy because it's $55 for 0 calories of processed food, and here we are selling a box for $70 that could feed you for 5 days of nutritious, wholesome local food. So some of that stuff, we're obviously trying to highlight. The local food's hard to find. I've curated over 200 and maybe 25 menus to date now. We've definitely never had a problem with trying to find food. Every day, these younger farmers that we invest in, they get more innovative. They want to be a 4-season farmer. Traditionally, Michigan used to be a 2-season farmer. You start early or late in the spring, you do all summer, you do a little bit in the fall, and then you're done for the season. These younger people like me, they want to make money every day. They want to make a paycheck. They want to get innovative. They grow mushrooms, they grow microgreens, they tap maple trees. They find other things on site that aren't just productive in row cropping. So the industrialized food system is kind of a labyrinth of misinformation in a nutshell. You see all these pretty labels, colorful things coming at you. You just think, okay, they have their best interest, to make sure we're eating healthy food. There is a lot of non-accountability for it. Food-like products, no real nutrition. Food disconnect, no traceability. Everybody looks at that and they kind of think, okay, those are just words. But in reality, if you look at that food, you have no idea who picked that food. You have no idea if that's slave labor involved in picking these Mexican strawberries. That stuff you have no idea. They have different economies with different commerce and different structures on labor. When you look at that stuff, it's like, what are you really eating and at what price did it take on the planet as well as on the community of the people that actually supported that system? There's glaring cracks in all of this stuff. The marketing strategies and the illusion of choice, the thousands of products, 80% owned by just 12 companies, maybe 15 if you're lucky. They control the whole market. And those are telltale signs of the infrastructure that can easily fall apart, which we saw in the pandemic. People panic buy. They went out and bought all this stuff. When we ran this project during the pandemic, people were like, how do we get involved in local food? And it was amazing to actually see that energy coming at us. It was a real turning point in it. And there still is very strong lineages to that currently. On the logistics here, the supply, the factory farms, industrial agriculture, the transportation, we discussed about how far these food miles are adding up on your plate. All these trucks on the 94 and 23 you see driving past us, those are all filling big box stores. Thousands of gallons of petrol going into the atmosphere to support that food system. When we could just buy all this stuff in our backyard and get to know our farmers by name. And a lot of times in this project, a lot of people discover these businesses and they have no idea that Seeley Farm, where I work at, is right around the corner from the neighborhood. And that they have an honor system. And you can drive over there and shop in peace and buy lake fish and tomatoes or whatever you like. And so highlighting some of this obviously is pretty negative in this speech, but it is the reality of the situation. And, a lot of people just buy into it. And the labels, just to cap that off, the labels are confusing for a reason. They want you to get lost, they want you to get confused, and you just go, you know what, just throw it in the cart. And that's exactly what they want. And it's intentional. The industrial agriculture here, why is it unsustainable? This again could be a full day dissertation on what happens when you get into this situation. Basically, we're destroying our environment, our waterways, our soil biome, our atmosphere with burning the fossil fuels to run this kind of equipment, but also the dust it portrays. In Michigan, if you were to take a drone right now and fly 50 miles above us and look at the broader state of Michigan, 95% of it is in commercial big box store agriculture. And you live in that biome. It's like a snow globe. We shake it up. Anything they do, we're exposed to. And these are things that we are trying to highlight. Like, we can change this narrative. So going back to the soil degradation, I mean, it's pretty obvious they're spraying herbicides, pesticides, fungicides here. It's all for one crop that exists in this space, not a diversified portfolio of flora and fauna. On the harvest here, they say 60 harvests left. I'm 46 right now. I grew up on a farm. I definitely worked my parents' CSA when I was 4 years old and up until I was 16 or 17. I can tell you the flora and fauna are definitely suffering right now. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I go into the field, snakes, frogs, lizards, all sorts of stuff. By the time I was 16, it would be cool to see 5 snakes in a whole season. Even though we were doing the right thing, we were around a bunch of conventional farming. People were spraying with crop dusters. I mean, it took a huge toll on that. Even to current times right now, the last 3 seasons, we've entered this current time zone, and farmers are texting me, are you seeing any bugs? I'm not seeing anything. Are you seeing any butterflies? No. Are you seeing any aphids? Are you seeing any pests? Good, bad? None of it. And that is a telltale sign that our systems are basically struggling to coexist with our bad habits. The future is regenerative. This is me at a hoop house in Dixboro Village. I managed this property and ran it for 3 years. It was 2 acres outside in the field. I had a heated greenhouse, which I wasn't very fond of. That was the owner's decision because, again, we're burning fossil fuels to grow a lettuce, which is kind of pointless. And there is other ways to do it, but that was his decision. But the idea of regenerative farming is to coexist with the landscape and the anatomy of what's already existing. So what is regenerative agriculture? That is a very blurred line here. The big corporations do not want to see this stuff, so they obviously are trying to bury it as far as possible as they can. But the general consensus here is to minimize the soil disturbance. That just means less tilling, less just being aggressive to it, and really just working with the landscape that's provided to you. Instead of our traditional model, we were all Europeans at once. We moved to the US to get away from the soils that were already depleted. We brought those impacts here in the upper Midwest. There was up to 16 to 20 feet of peat on the land, and these farmers looked at it like it was a gold mine, and it was a gold mine. The buffalo had migrated back and forth, chomped on all the plants, which again is a huge part of integrating livestock to it. That vibration stimulates mycelium. That mycelium releases nutrients. The plants in that soil biome do better with that movement. It's not destroying it, it's just grazing it. The chemical input, I mean, that's obviously a no-brainer. I work with organic farms. Most of them say you have to sacrifice 40% of the crop, specifically with fruit. Fruit is one of the hardest things to grow. I work with an apple orchard, Jim Cohn, up out of Flushing, Michigan. He's 500 acres, 33 different varieties of apples. He loses 40% of his crop knowingly every year just to do the right thing. You know, he came to terms with himself. He knows all these patrons and customers. He felt overridden with guilt that he was poisoning the people that were supporting the business. And then adopting the local environment and the cover crops there, they pretty much go hand in hand. You never want to have bare soil. When you go around and you drive out in the country lanes, even today, take a ride outside of town. You see all these fields disced up? Terrible move. That's like the worst thing you can do. I mean, we're all pale right now because we've been in winter. That's like taking all your clothes off and throwing you out there in the field when it's 90 degrees. What's going to happen? You're going to get sunburned, you know, really bad. You're going to take a beating. Your body's going to stress. To do the regenerative agriculture, you need to have the cover crop on the land because that keeps the soil intact, and it also keeps the organisms alive. I did a talk with Jim Cohn, the apple grower. When he first started farming, like all farms, we think of soil as 3 different layers. He brought a soil biologist out there with a double PhD. He basically put us to layman's terms real fast. There's 27 layers to the soil. Some of those could be a 1/4 inch, some of them could be a foot, some of them could be 3 foot. Different anatomy and different biology lives in all those layers. And that was a real grounding moment to me. Like, how do you operate in that space without destroying that biome? So it was a really, really good lesson to learn to hear that kind of stuff. And it is important, because the more nutritious the soil is, the more nutritious the food is, no matter at what scale you're doing this. So here's a small video of just basically breaking down regenerative agriculture. And a lot of this stuff you can do in your backyard. I mean, you really can. It's an application that goes way beyond the farm.
Regenerative agriculture is a set of farming practices that increase biodiversity in soil organic matter. Currently, most agricultural practices are devastating to biodiversity. Even organic agriculture, while not as bad, still does more harm than good. Regenerative agriculture is a way to reverse this trend to actually make a positive impact on the land. So what does regenerative agriculture actually involve? Answering this question is actually pretty tricky, because the practices that work best largely depend on the land that's being worked with. So the variety of different practices border on infinity, a bit more than this video can cover. However, let's look at 3 common forms that regenerative agriculture can take. The soil is full of organisms which are helpful for plants. Some convert soil nitrogen into a plant-usable form. Some bring water to the plants that would otherwise be out of reach. Others loosen and aerate the soil, increasing water absorption and allowing plant roots to penetrate deeper. When soil is turned over by a machine, most of these organisms are killed, so the crops must rely on chemical fertilizer, which ends up leaching into the water. Central to no-till farming is to not do that. Instead of tilling, plant cover crops whose roots break up the soil. Let the worms aerate the soil and bring down nutrients. Keep the soil covered with an organic mulch, which will break down over time, adding more organic matter to the soil. From the release of methane to clearing forests for pasture land, cattle raising is known for being very environmentally destructive. But this is not inherent to grazing animals. If the right practices are put in place, enormous amounts of carbon can be sequestered into the ground, soil can be built, and even desertification can be reversed in a matter of years. Here's how it works. The growth of grass tends to start slow, accelerate, and slow down again. This middle area is where it accrues the most biomass the most efficiently. If it's eaten before it gets to this point, its growth will never speed up. This is what happens with traditional pastured animals. They eat all the grass, which doesn't have the chance to grow back fast enough before getting eaten again, and we have overgrazing. This leads to soil erosion, drought, and desertification. But if the animals are kept in a tightly packed herd, like they used to be in nature, the grass has time to grow before being eaten. All that biomass in the grass is carbon that comes from the air. Not all of the grass gets eaten, however. Some of it gets pooped on and trampled, which ends up creating the perfect conditions for new topsoil to be built. This ends up happening incredibly quickly. This is one of the most complex and location-dependent practices there are. I will therefore be overgeneralizing a bit. It always starts with observing a local forest and the relationships between everything in it. The plants, the animals, the fungi, the landscape, the soil, the water, and then recreating these relationships in a way that's just as ecologically resilient, but produces more food. Food forests are often thought of as comprising 7 layers: the root layer, the ground cover layer, the herb layer, the shrub layer, the low tree layer, the high tree layer, and the vine layer. Every one of these layers either produces some sort of food or medicine, or is in some way helpful to the system as a whole. The plants are mostly perennials and include as many native species as possible. These 3 examples of regenerative agriculture, plus all the rest of them, all have something in common. Whereas in conventional agriculture, you seek to create as many of one thing as possible, in regenerative agriculture, you seek to create as many relationships between things as possible. You are one of those things. What sort of relationship with the land do you want to foster?
So I guess looping back to this, before we start to wind things back down, to complete our circular economy and food mission, all the farms featured in the Hungry Locavore's weekly menus follow regenerative practices. That is part of me visiting these places, walking these properties. I've been doing this pretty much my whole life. You know, people say, oh, I don't spray, and I look at their field, and I'm like, that's interesting. It's all kale, but where's everything else? You know, it's like, it's pretty obvious, you know, once you've seen it many a times. Each restaurant or bakery we feature includes at least one, often many ingredients sourced from local farms and at minimum within the state of Michigan's borders. Because again, we're trying to draw the money back into our economy. This builds a circular economy and ensures that our locavores are connected to the best local food around. We are also very open-minded to somebody saying like, hey, I know this farm, or this is my favorite restaurant, you know? So anything that people can give back to us, that obviously just encourages us as a community to grow together, as also share better visions for the future of local food. On how to sign up here, it's relatively simple. We're not invasive with our emails. A lot of people are scared to give an email address. The general gist of it is if you go onto the website, you say you want to receive our email, you'll get one email from us on Sunday. That basically will show you the menu, and then you have from Sunday to Wednesday to buy the box. Again, it's very flexible. If you're out of town or you don't like the box, you don't have to buy it. If you don't buy the box until Wednesday morning, we do send out a second reminder email. It just says, hey, the box is still available till midnight tonight. You buy the box, then you get to pick up at the location that you choose. So some of the handouts are structured for 2-hour handouts. If you want to talk to me more about the system, I would advise going to a handout where I'm at, and that's Moonwings Cafe on Friday from 4 to 6, and then Dozier Coffee on Saturday from 9 to 11. The other 2 handouts we do are with businesses that we've partnered with, and we've built relationships, and we're basically trying to support that business through our project, which brings in more commerce to their business. And most of those businesses are all based around Michigan. Born people, Michigan products. Some of them are transients, just like myself, but the broader community is, you know, the core value here. And then thanks for listening. Hopefully you guys got something out of this, and if anybody has any questions about any of it, I would love to try to help answer that. And if not, we hope you guys have a great Earth Day. Thank you. And I guess that's all I got.